One subject which can often be difficult for student engagement is history. I'm thinking here of history proper, not other areas of social studies like geography or economics, because those tend to have more active student engagement. But we're all too familiar with the concept of dry, dusty, boring history lectures with teachers droning on about dates and places dealing with a lot of old dead guys. So why is the history class a problem for student engagement? Well, one reason is that there's a lot of content to be covered in a history class. I recently read a satirical article stating that, lo and behold, researchers have discovered that history is continually growing without stopping. It's an alarming fact. But there is a tremendous amount of material, even if we believe in a young Earth. That's over 6,000 years of material to deal with. Even if we just focus on U.S. history, that still goes back over 600 years. How do we deal with that in 50 minutes a day for 180 days? We know we have to be selective, but even then we can feel overwhelmed with the amount of content. So we feel like we have to take the fire hose approach, just pour out fact after fact after fact to try to deal with everything. And the most time-efficient way to do that is by lecturing. But another problem history teachers face is that details are important. Things like dates and names are crucial to understanding what happened. If you're studying music history, it's important to know that Bach lived at about the same time as Handel, and that Mozart and Haydn were contemporaries. That helps you understand their music a bit better. The locations of battles during the war between the states is important, so you can learn more about how the war was fought. We can't just teach general principles of history. Students need to know the details, to know how the general principles are worked out. That importance of detail often leads back to that fire hose approach again, just spewing out reams of facts for the students to dutifully copy, commit to short-term memory, and promptly forget. Now, by definition, history is not current, real-world material. Other subjects like science and math at least deal with how the world is today. English deals with communication today. Even the Bible tells us how to live in Christ today. But history isn't directly about the lives of students today, so there's a disconnect. The reign of King George I doesn't have direct impact on how students live today. They don't see those effects in front of their faces like they do, for example, the effects of the rotation of the earth. Now, we will show later how this is addressed, but we have to see that there is a difference in the relevance of the content. And this leads to the idea that history is just dry and dusty relics, dead white men, or whatever you want to say about it. So, what are some ways we can overcome this disengagement? I want to look at just a few principles in the remainder of this lesson that will help us. In general, we want our students to think like a historian. Now, what do historians do? Well, sure, they find out facts, they find out names, dates, and places, but is that all they do? Is a historian just someone who can recite the names of the presidents in order? Is it just someone who can tell you the dates of the major battles of the War for Independence? Are you a historian if all you can do is list from memory the countries absorbed by the old Soviet Union? Of course not. A historian knows those things, of course, but he can then tell you the meaning and importance of those names and dates and places. He can tell you how they fit together, how they relate to one another, how they apply today. He can look at historical documents and artifacts and tell you how they inform his conclusions. This is what we want for our students. We're not looking for the child savant who can memorize endless reams of facts, somebody who can just spout off the names of all the monarchs of England from the time of Alfred the Great. Young children can be taught things like that, but we don't say they're historians or that they know history. So we need to get beyond that in our instruction as well. What we're dealing with is higher level thinking, the upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy. We want our students to deal with application, synthesis, analysis, evaluation, not just factual recall issues. That's what historians do, and that's what we want our students to do. But higher level thinking presupposes knowledge of low-level factual content. If the students don't know the factual content of the history, they can't interpret, apply, or synthesize it. Knowledge of the data, the content of the history, is essential. But just like a foundation of a pyramid is not complete, and you don't even have a pyramid with just the foundation, so the factual knowledge of history is not complete, and students don't really know history if they just know the facts. So please don't interpret anything I'm saying here to mean students should not be learning facts, or that knowledge of historical content is not important or even essential. It is essential, but it's not enough. Here's the thing. We don't want our students' knowledge of history to be a mile wide and an inch deep. We want our students to have some degree of depth to their knowledge. Of course, that depth is not going to be in the deep end of the pool of the level of the history professor with several doctorates, but it should be deeper than the wading pool, more than just knowing a few facts about a bunch of material. And that depth of knowledge is more likely to stick with them longer than just the next test. I mean, you know that you have students who cram data during the period before your tests, and they could probably not tell you most of it if you asked them the next day or even the next period. Is that what we want? Or look at it quantitatively. We can present 10 pieces of information, but the students only remember 2 of them beyond the test. Or we can present 5 pieces of information in more depth, and they will remember 4 of them past the test. Which would you prefer? See, this is the issue of selectivity. We're always selecting what we teach and what we leave out. Let's use U.S. history as an example. Obviously, we want students to know the basic facts of U.S. history. We want them to know basically what happened in the War for Independence, what happened in the Great Depression, and so on. But beyond that, what are we going to expect them to know? Even if we do a detailed study of the War for Independence, we have to leave some things out. There's always more we could study in history than we can do at any one time. So, a study of U.S. history involves selecting the most important things for students to learn. Those things that are key, that give the best understanding of a time period, and which give information which will be most important for a later understanding. For example, a detailed study of the Declaration of Independence is much more important than a study of the various vegetables grown by Washington at Mount Vernon. So even when we have courses that are broad surveys like U.S. history or world history, we need to be selective. We need to focus on important things, the things that are most crucial for our students to take away from our class. We also need to think about assessment. How do we assess? What are about our tests? What are we testing our students on? I think when it comes down to it, that's what they're going to remember. That's what they're going to focus on. If our tests are exclusively factual recall, match these dates with these events, match this person with these important things, then factual recall is what they're going to study. That's what they're going to spend their time on. If we test them on application, comprehension, analysis, that's what they're going to take away from the class. We've got to be sure that we're including those higher level thinking skills, the upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy, in our assessments as well as in our instruction. So what's this going to look like? How can we teach history in a more engaging way? In our next session, we'll look at a sample lesson plan that will show how we can get the students to dig into the historical record and learn to think like historians.